Hi, everybody. My name is David Shapira. I'm proud as chairman of the Beacon and Shapira Foundations to be a financial supporter and a member of the executive committee of the Eradicate Hate Global Summit. As we're nearing the end of a long day, I know you've all heard this before, but I want to thank each one of you for coming. Both those of you who are here and those of you who are online, and especially for your passionate dedication to do something about hate-fueled violence. Especially want to thank Laura Ellsworth and Mark Nordenberg, who you have seen many times already today, but without them, none of this would be happening. Elie Wiesel famously said, "What hurts the victim most is not the cruelty of the oppressor, but the silence of the bystander." Each of you in your own way, through your action and leadership, and your participation in this summit, is pushing back against that silence, and I thank you for that. I can think of few people who do more to push back against the silence, particularly around one particular form of oppression, anti-Semitism or Jew hatred, than Ambassador Deborah Lipstadt, whom it is my honor and pleasure to introduce as the keynote speaker today. Deborah Lipstadt was confirmed by the U.S. Senate earlier this year as the special envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism with the rank of ambassador. As special envoy, she leads the efforts to advance U.S. foreign policy to counter anti-Semitism throughout the world. Ambassador Lipstadt is well known for her storied career as a historian, academic, historical consultant, public figure, and author. She's one of the leading voices in the fight against anti-Semitism. She has an MA and a PhD from Brandeis University, and most recently she's been with the Emory University's Tam Institute for Jewish Studies, which she helped to found, and where she served as a Durant Professor of Modern Jewish History and Holocaust Studies. I have to tell you that in order to prepare myself to introduce the ambassador, I decided to re-watch the film Denial, which is the story of how she fought against a lawsuit by David Irving, a known Holocaust denier in England. If people here have not seen that film, I really strongly recommend it. And Ambassador Lipstadt is exactly the hero, and she matches the description that I've given here today. I think now it is just my honor to introduce Ambassador Lipstadt.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me to participate in this truly important event and the poignancy of it being held here in Pittsburgh, where we are all too familiar with the horrific results of the convergence of violent extremism and anti-Semitism. It's an honor to address not just those of you in Pittsburgh, but the global audience, and I'm very grateful to the summit's organizers for putting together an event like this. While this summit consists primarily of discussion and dialogue, I know that everyone here will turn their thoughts expressed over these 3 days into action, and that's critical. I also want to take a moment to acknowledge the survivors of the Tree of Life shooting, whom I know are with you today. Your strength and fortitude inspire me to continue the work I do. And this community, as well as the wider community in Pittsburgh that rallied behind the Tree of Life congregation after the appalling attack, serves as an inspiring reminder that I am not alone in this fight and that you are not alone. You are well aware, everyone who's come here today and who's listening is well aware that in many parts of the world, anti-Semitism has reached new levels of intensity. It seems that no matter where we turn, we see escalations of Jew hatred. I'm working in sadly, in the growth industry. We see it in physical attacks, we see it expressed rhetorically, we see it in anti-Semitic imagery and stereotypes that is sometimes used in critiques of Israel's policies. We hear it from longtime haters, government officials, NGO leaders, and from the person on the street, or sadly, the person posting online. We find it in all places on the political spectrum. But rather than delineating how bad things are, I would prefer to use this opportunity to step back and describe to you how the Department of State, my office, Secretary Blinken, and the officers in Washington and posts around the world are condemning and combating what some historians aptly describe as the longest or oldest hatred in all its forms, both traditional and contemporary. I've been in office only a few months. I'm still learning my way around the labyrinthian State Department building. If you've ever been here, I suspect there's still people from previous administrations who haven't found their way out. I'm familiarizing myself with the protocol that comes with having the coveted rank of ambassador. Yet, in the relatively short time, I have begun to truly understand not just what this job is all about, but what the possibilities are. Let me start by relaying in a somewhat prosaic fashion on the image, relying on an image of a pitchfork. Yes, a pitchfork, says the person who has lived her entire life in an urban environment. Prior to my entering office, I imagined that my mission would be akin to a pitchfork with just one prong, an important one, but a singular one, fighting acts of anti-Semitism. I knew I was tasked, as my predecessors before me, with fighting back against expressions of Jew hatred. My job would be akin to putting out fires, whether they were rhetorical or physical. And if the fire had already been extinguished, my job would be make sure that the embers had been sufficiently stomped out to prevent their reemerging as yet another conflagration. In that capacity, I saw myself reaching out to Jewish communities that felt besieged or under threat to assure them that the United States tolerated no anti-Semitism. I saw myself as sending a message to other governments that they had to respond strongly to these outrages. And so it has been. I have traveled to other countries with that message, not because America is perfect, but because it's not, to borrow a phrase from my boss, Secretary Blinken. We know we share some of these flaws with other countries. And just as our government will not tolerate them, we expect other governments to act strongly against them. In short, we do not abide anti-Semitism, whether it is in our midst or in that of another country. I have spoken not just with government officials, but also with business and religious leaders from an array of countries in order to convey that message. I've made it clear in public statements and private discussions that Lufthansa Airlines' treatment of a group of Orthodox passengers raised real issues. I've consulted with the former chief rabbi of Moscow about the situation facing Russian Jews in light of the Kremlin's ongoing war against Ukraine. I called out Iran's supreme leader for engaging in overtly anti-Semitic comments, criticized Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban for relying on blatant expressions of racism and anti-Semitism. And I've consulted with UN officials about the necessity for them to address vigorously this pernicious evil. UN representatives of all people cannot stand idly by. I attended a very moving ceremony in Argentina of two rival football clubs adopting the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism to quell some of the anti-Semitic and rhetoric and language used by sports clubs, a growing concern in South America and in Europe. My office has brought together many counterparts from other countries to see how we might best work together to fight anti-Semitism wherever and however it occurs, in person, online, in government policies and political platforms, or in international organizations. In a couple of weeks, I shall join with other envoys in Brussels to address the issue of ban on ritual slaughter and male circumcision, which impacts both the Jewish and the Muslim community. We do so not simply to accommodate the needs of two minority communities, though that is important, but because we and the highest level of the US government also see this as an issue of freedom of religion and, more broadly, human rights. And we do this at the governmental level, at a meeting convened by the European Union. Sadly, working as I do in what often seems to be, as I said earlier, a growth industry, there have been other opportunities, too numerous for me to recount tonight, for me to call out both the anti-Semites and those who have made, inadvertently or not, anti-Semitic comments. But going back to the image of the pitchfork, I've discovered there's yet another prong to my pitchfork. If the pitchfork I just described to you entails challenges and the need to fight against something, the second prong entails opportunities and the chance to fight for something. In countries where there was once animus towards Jews, there are now hands beginning to be outstretched. As a result of the Abraham Accords, which have been enthusiastically adopted by the Biden-Harris administration, we now have the opportunity to do something positive. Usually, when you're talking about anti-Semitism, the word positive doesn't come into the discussion. In my conversations with representatives of the UAE, Bahrain, and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and in my visits to Saudi Arabia and the UAE, it's become clear that in these countries, governmental attitudes towards Jews, towards anti-Semitism, are changing. In some of the countries that are signatories to the Accords, Morocco, UAE, and Bahrain, and Saudi Arabia, which is not yet a signatory, but one hopes will eventually become one, I see a growing commitment to forging better relations with the Jewish community. That they have not lessened their concern with the geopolitical conflict between Israel and the Palestinians, but they have come or are coming to recognize that attitudes towards Jews are an issue separate and apart from the conflict. They are increasingly coming to understand, and in many respects already understand, that anti-Semitism is an irrational hatred, one that must be thoroughly disconnected from any geopolitical issue. And they are also beginning to acknowledge the rich Jewish history that once existed and even prospered in and was part of their country's histories. When I met the deputy foreign minister of Saudi Arabia, he stood up as I walked into his very beautiful office and reached out his hand and said, "I come from a city of Jews, Medina." As they embrace these challenges, and they certainly seem willing to do so, their actions may well have a ripple effect worldwide. Now, there are people who have challenged me about working with countries whose human rights records are far from perfect and that are not democracies. I have told them repeatedly that I will go anywhere and talk to anyone who is serious about addressing the issue of anti-Semitism. I do so not just because my portfolio is to combat anti-Semitism, but because I also believe that if they take this issue seriously, there's a chance that they'll take other human rights issues seriously too. And yet there's one added element to my pitchfork. It is the neck or the handle from which the two prongs emerge. This, in fact, may be the most important aspect of my job. It holds together the multifaceted work I am doing, binding together all our efforts and adding gravitas to all that I do. I came into this office aware that there are many people who fail to take anti-Semitism seriously. Some fail to do so because they are not familiar with the true extent of anti-Semitism and the way in which it is connected to broader issues of prejudice and hatred. They don't understand that what starts with the Jews surely doesn't end with the Jews. These people are sometimes inclined to see the fight against anti-Semitism as a niche issue, one that is of concern to a particular group and impacts only that group. Even more, other people are not quite able to conceive of Jews as victims. In their minds, the ability to pass and the privilege they believe many American Jews enjoy disqualifies them from being a community that is impacted by prejudice. I came into office determined to change that kind of thinking. With the strong support of the White House and the Secretary of State, we are demonstrating that the fight against anti-Semitism is not something separate and apart from the rest of American foreign policy, but integral to it. At a time when there is much pessimism in our country about the strength of our democracy, I say let's temper that pessimism. Let us revel in the fact that this country, with all its flaws and all its shortcomings, takes the issue of anti-Semitism seriously. It doesn't do so as a means of winning favor with one relatively small group in its population. It does so because the vicious animus of Jew hatred, better known as anti-Semitism, is a danger not just to the welfare of the Jewish community. That alone would make it worth fighting. But it's also a danger to the overall welfare of our own democracies and democracies worldwide. Speaking as a historian, I can say there's never been a democracy that tolerated anti-Semitism and remained a healthy democracy. I feel privileged to hold this portfolio and to work together with dedicated colleagues at the State Department. I'm also very appreciative of the support so many of you showed to me during the long confirmation process. We will not solve this thorny problem. This is much greater than anything I can do. I can't solve it. But as Pirkei Avot, Ethics of the Fathers, observed millennia ago, while you are not able to complete this task, that does not free you from the obligation to undertake it with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. I am confident that this group will walk away from this summit with a call to action. All of us share the responsibility to combat hate and manifestations of anti-Semitism. This will invigorate us in our efforts to counter hatred everywhere with even greater energy and determination. I can only hope we are worthy of the task. Let me also wish you a kativa v'chatima tova. May we all be inscribed for a good and healthy year and a quiet one as well. Thank you very much.